Host of Forged in Fire.
Kyle Mann.
I'm G. Warner Wallace.
Kira Davis.
It's Ben Adams.
Hey, this is Dave Baker.
Carrie Pomeroli.
This is Mike Reiner.
This is Ethan Nicole.
This is Leanne Morgan.
This is Graham Parker, the 5th GP, and this is why you should never
Never.
How I got suckered in.
I'm so embarrassed that I'm here.
You're wasting your time. You got better things to do.
never listen.
Those darling, yummy Reverend and the Reprobate.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Reverend and the Reprobate. My name is Lucas Pinkert. I'm a real-life Reverend, and here with me always is a man who keeps his laptop charged as much as he does his energy levels. It's Dan Flip Gibson. What's going on,
Laptops don't take coffee. What's going on is I am here.
What's the most entertaining thing you've done today? Because I know what mine is.
I caught a Pokemon.
Oh yeah, what'd you caught?
I don't remember the name.
I do remember. So we went over to your house this weekend. You had a conversation with your son about whether or not Pokemon are getting harder to catch. He was like, what? I was like, that is the ultimate.
They are getting harder to catch.
The ultimate old man question.
Yeah.
Are Pokemon getting harder to catch?
I have like 20 Ultra Balls, and I'll throw them. I'll get the Pokemon all the way down to his health, and I'll throw an Ultra Ball, and it'll pop right out. And I'll throw like 4 or 5, and I go, what the heck? I never had this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think they're getting harder to catch.
Well,
I think in my old age, it's less easy for me to catch a Pokemon.
The most entertaining thing for me today was watching your wife try to back into a parking spot out in the church parking lot. There were a couple of times where she was coming at it, and I was like, that's not going to happen.
Coming in too hot.
It's an empty parking lot, and there was an 8-point turn to get into the parking space.
Yeah. Empty parking lots are a good place to practice backing up.
They really are. They're good. And for a woman like Heather, who's only been driving for half her life, actually more than now, for a woman who's been driving for 20 years.
You watch it.
She
You watch it bring an age into her bad driving.
She's got, for a woman who's only been driving for 20 years, a little extra practice in an empty
parking lot. Not only is she a
lot.
bad driver, I'd rather talk about some more things.
I figure if we're going to step in it, let's just get in there with both feet. Today on the show, we have the very talented comedian Dave Pendleton. So Dave Pendleton has an incredible dry bar special that's out. He's always traveling on the road. He talks to us a little bit about his new comedy club. When he was in Fate, Texas, not too far from us. He talks about it to us a little bit about his new comedy club and the things that they've got going on there. A little bit about how he got into ventriloquism, what ventriloquism actually is, and how you can use comedy if you're a ventriloquist. It's wild. We discussed that, plus whether or not Jeff Dunham's actually funny, and
his favorite Muppet and his favorite cult.
Yeah, there's a lot in this interview to like and some things to cringe at. So it's basically
thank y'all for watching
our typical episode. Yeah, make sure that you like, subscribe, ding the little bell, leave us a review, tell your friends, your neighbors, your favorite ventriloquist about the Reverend and the Reprobate.
Yeah.
And without any further ado,
Dave Pendleton. And the premiere of our new table.
Well, Danley, on our sweet, clean airwaves today.
Yep, always clean.
Always the cleanest of airwaves. We've got one of the guys that I first was exposed to him at the wedding of a mutual friend. He is the man whose organization has sent us more rejection letters than all other organizations combined. It is the very talented, very funny, the ventriloquist and master of puppets himself, Dave Pendleton. What's going on, man? How are you?
Well, you need to tell me more about what you are saying there about getting rejection letters.
Okay,
what on earth are you talking about?
So we have
like when
several.
you submit a college essay, that's what we did.
Yes, we submitted our college essay to the Christian Comedy Association on the Facebook group, and we're very kindly told your podcast is nice, but since you're not comedians, you were not granted admittance. And we were like, this is hysterical. Let's try again, and got another very similarly worded letter. Thus far, they've put up with our shenanigans. But it wasn't until Dave noticed
Hold on. What do you mean thus far?
Thus far, because I'm going to continue doing this until we get like a letter that is airworthy, right? So what happened? How I found out Dave
we need them to take this serious, either with our rejection or acceptance.
The president of said association I was at our mutual friend Kristen Weber's wedding, just babysitting an iPad playlist, and Dave came up to me and very kindly told me that I was doing a great job.
Shuffle.
Standing there in my best suit that looked like Matlock as I as
was
I
it white?
No, it was
shouldn't wear white
it was
to
a
a
nice
wedding.
light gray.
When I think of Matlock suits, I think of white.
That's more W.A. Criswell and old Steve Martin. So anyway, Dave came up to me, and so we started talking, and he was like, well, I'm the president of the Christian Comedy Association. I was like, funny you should say that. You guys, we've gotten your rejection letters.
We've got beef.
And that was the start of a wonderful, amazing friendship.
We're beefing already.
The next night, my wife and I went and saw Dave and Robert Lee and Dory McLemore perform at a church not too far away, and we absolutely loved it. Dave's got so I'm just gonna be transparent, man.
Be transparent.
I'm wigged out by puppets.
Tell him.
And I want to know first, before we hop into like some of the comedic lessons we want to glean off of you tonight, as we aspire to be someone you can accept into your group, into your clique of the CCA. I'm curious, how many people that's their first reaction when you tell them that you're a ventriloquist and that you do comedy with ventriloquist puppets, that they're like, oh, that's weird, or that they're creeped out by it? Because I gotta say, I felt that way until I saw your act, and now I'm a little more okay with them.
Oh, just a little more okay.
Just a little. Baby steps, right? I'm not a big guy, so I got to take small steps.
I don't get it. Like, it's not the majority.
Okay.
But I certainly do get that reaction from some people. And I've had some people who have been, like, I was a part of a conference event that was actually on a cruise ship, and sat at the table with some of the other performers. And the night that I was doing my show on the cruise, was told by one of the people in our group that she would be in the balcony all the way and back.
Oh, wow.
Because she just gets freaked out by ventriloquist puppets.
Wow.
So it is a thing, but I don't run into it like all the time. But I certainly do get it every now and then.
I will say my fear is at least rational for two reasons. One, because I grew up in the Child's Play era. Right, we saw Chucky and all that whenever we were kids. And the second was my grandmother, who I think, like so many grandmothers, she had a room that she did all of her sewing stuff in. That had the trundle bed that the kids could sleep on whenever they were here, and it was also wall to wall porcelain dolls. Yep. And so every nightmare I ever woke up from at their house, I was greeted by 1,000 little porcelain doll faces of all of the ethnicities of the world that she had collected. And
she probably did a lot of work for Disney in supplying them with the It's a Small World characters, right?
So my wife forced me to go on that ride, and I was physically nauseous the entire time when we were in the line. Like I've got a serious problem. Well, I'm glad to know that that's not the norm for. Okay, yep, this is weird. Tell me about what this is. For those of you who are listening on audio,
what are you doing? Who are these guys?
That's Lucas and Dan.
Lucas and Dan. Well, la-ti-da. What's up?
Oh man!
Right? Okay, so this thing,
nose wiggles.
this particular character has a lot of movement. So we got ears wiggling, nose wiggling.
What happens when you get scared?
Oh, nice! Like a little alfalfa thing happening.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how well you can see this, but look at that. The nose lights up.
Wow. Whoa!
That is way more high tech than what we have.
Yes, it is. Yep. So,
okay, well, here's what I want you to know about this. Okay, look at the controls on this. They're it's like typewriter keys, and it's all mechanics, bent wires, actually bicycle spokes that went into the design of this.
Wow.
Look at the little toggle switch. That's a toggle switch that turns the nose on. There's a battery inside the head. And of course, like a flashlight type battery. The eyes move according to how you tilt the head. So you have to really be aware of how you're tilting the head to get the eyes to move. The eyebrows also go up and down automatically. Not all the puppets that, ventriloquist puppets are like this. with the automatic eyebrows. But the brothers that built this guy designed it that way. And actually, he winks too. And when he winks, the one eyebrow comes down correspondent with the wink. See that little wink action there?
That's
so
wild.
Lots of cool movements on this thing, just like on a control post. And then, of course, this goes down into the body. Here's what's cool about this puppet. When do you think this puppet was made? When would you say this puppet was built? Just in terms of an era.
Based off of the typewriter, I would think maybe the 60s.
Yeah, if it's typewriter pieces,
70s?
I'm trying to think of when the last time I used an IBM Selectric was.
When was QWERTY invented?
Okay.
Yeah.
Here we go, guys. This puppet was built 1938.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah. So he was made by the McElroy brothers or McElroy brothers, and George and Glenn McElroy. They built these puppets basically when they were teenagers. They were in their late teens, early 20s, and only made about 30 or so of these puppets. And all of them are now in private collections and highly prized.
Sure.
Very collectible. David Copperfield has, I think, 4 now in his collection. Jeff Dunham has a couple in his collection. But here's the thing. I am the only ventriloquist, only contemporary modern ventriloquist that regularly performs with an original McElroy. All the others are in collections, but none are out in performance. I'm the only one that continues to perform with one of these vintage characters.
So that actually was going to be my question: is how many? Since this is such a collectible item, like how many people?
You already answered it.
Go out with him, and it makes sense.
So yes, that's right.
It makes sense.
I'm the only one. As a matter of fact, I've been told numerous times that I'm crazy.
Yeah,
for
even going out
around
with
the world.
Right.
But
okay, so is that a wooden puppet or is it porcelain?
Now that's a great question. It's not porcelain. It's actually wood putty. So they sculpted it in clay and then made a plaster cast mold,
right,
and then pressed the wood putty into that plaster mold to create the shell of the head, and then put all the mechanics in it past that.
Wow.
Cut the jaw out for that. There's obviously some design that they had to do in there for the teeth, and you've already noticed that it has that's incredible. You can hardly even see the line or the seam. See right there, there's the seam for where that's a hard piece that just pivots upward for that, to punctuate that movement with the upper lip.
So there's a ton of craftsmanship that goes into creeping me out.
Definitely.
Exactly.
Do you ever have nightmares about puppets?
Not at all.
That's awesome.
Because I can.
Also, let me put it this way. I don't have nightmares about puppets like them coming to life or anything like that. With this guy, I actually do have nightmares that I accidentally drop him, or he gets lost, or it gets damaged somehow. It falls off the stand or something, and shatters. I've literally woken up in the middle of the night, freaked out that had happened, but that's the nature of the nightmares that I have about that.
That makes sense.
Speaking of traveling, you'd mentioned you were the only one that tours with this. How do you travel with that? I'm guessing it's a carry-on.
Yes, what I just showed you. Actually, I just got back from a trip. I was in Florida. I had a gig down there, and the body is in a large suitcase because obviously the body is too it's too
replaceable.
Big. But the thing about the body is that it's not. All the mechanics are in the head, as you just saw.
Yeah.
The body is just a shell.
Does anybody care about the body?
No one cares about
the head
bodies.
Seems like it's the big collectible thing. Like, is the McElroy body? Does anybody care if it's got a McElroy body? Like,
this is a McElroy original body.
Yeah, like with car guys, it's doesn't have the original engine.
This came off
and
the
all
factory
that stuff.
floor.
Yeah.
Yeah, there would be collectors who would that would be a little piece of notoriety that they would want to have, but it wouldn't have near the value, of course, as a complete
right
McElroy.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
Is there anything
like original McElroy hands, or even original McElroy feet would be would have some value. I don't know if McElroy feet are actually featured on Wiki Feet, but that's another story.
Our friend Carrie Pomeroli has been prominently featured on Wiki Feet. We found out whenever we talked to her.
We're aware of Wiki Feet,
yeah,
sir.
we do know about Wiki Feet.
We would love to bring that to the CCA.
That's one of our. We may not be stand-ups, but we have extensive Wiki Feet knowledge.
Yeah,
that
we can rate with the best of them.
We'll fill that niche for you guys. Okay, so
that was a weird offshoot.
So how does it work? Like going through TSA with that? Because like I can't go through TSA with long hair. Like, I can't imagine like that.
There was one guy who was just trying to be funny. The case went through and they looked at it. And then, of course, it got flagged to be inspected.
Sure.
And
of course.
The TSA official came around and looked at me and he said, "Excuse me, sir, do you have a mechanical head inside this case?" I said, yes, as a matter of fact, I do. I think he was mostly just curious to see what it really looked like.
Right.
But for the most part, I just explained to them what it is. And they say, "Oh, that's really interesting." And that's that. So my own airport, I fly out of my own airport enough now that I'm kind of known there. So when I go through, I've seen some of the same TSA people numerous times, and they just kind of look at me and say, "Where's the gig today?"
Nice.
So.
And when you say your own airport, you mean like the local airport that services, not the Dave Pendleton International Airport that, or is it? I don't know.
There's some talk of that.
All right, so I'm curious with like
my own local airport, of course.
The switch that turns the nose on and off, right? So it can look like it's got a little bit of rosacea. What's like the
nosacea?
Yeah, nosacea. Thank you. So when you go through TSA, that has to, because the technology is so old, that has to look like the word you can't say on an airplane, right? It's got to look like
like some sort of a
bump. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because there's batteries in there, and that's what they ask about the most. Right. They say, we can see the mechanics. That looks like there's lots of complex mechanics inside there, but what's the battery all about?
You don't tell them like, "Hey, flip the switch and see for yourself."
Yeah. So consequently, that gets subject to the swab test.
Oh, really?
I bet you he hates that.
Exactly.
When he does the swab test, do you do the voice?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, that's just a given.
Right. Well, I feel like that this is likely a cliche question because I'm sure you get this a lot. But I think it's something that our audience would find fascinating.
It's a very insightful question that's coming.
How did you get started in this?
That's a terrible question.
I know it is, but it does seem like a great starting point.
It is.
I think my parents dropped me on my head when I was a baby.
Same.
And
a lot of paint chips.
Some glue.
I was as a young kid, I was 4 or 5 years old. I was fascinated by puppets, and anytime, what would you like for Christmas or what do you want for your birthday? It was always a puppet or something related to a puppet. Actually, puppets of all kinds, marionettes, hand puppets, any kind of puppet. And I had seen at a friend's house a ventriloquist puppet, which I thought was really cool looking, with the slot jaw mouth.
Mm-hmm.
It had a little string in the back, and you just pull the string and the mouth opens up. And so I wanted one of those. And it was my grandmother that got me a Charlie McCarthy toy ventriloquist, doll with the slot jaw mouth with the string in the back. She also found a record called Instant Ventriloquism, created by Jimmy Nelson.
Okay.
Jimmy Nelson, back in that era, and actually slightly before that era. We're talking for me, that this would have been the mid 60s, early 70s. Jimmy Nelson used to do commercials with Danny O'Day and Farfel, and they did Nestle's commercials. Danny O'Day would sing Nestles, Nestle's makes the very best. And then Farfel would say, chocolate. And then his mouth would kind of snap together.
Yeah.
There would be perhaps some people in your listening audience that would immediately know what I'm talking about. What you could do is just go to YouTube and put in Jimmy Nelson Nestle's commercial, and you would see exactly what I'm talking about. But he did lots of these, but he produced this record album, Instant Ventriloquism, and he just gave instruction, verbally, of course, on a record album, how to do this. And it spawned the next generation of ventriloquists. I mentioned Jeff Dunham. He learned off that record album. Just about every ventriloquist that I know from my era, we all learned off that same record album. It spawned the next generation.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
No. I'll let you have a question, because I just want to dive down the ventriloquism rabbit hole.
It is. It's still,
because I've got a 6-month-old, and I want to learn to throw my voice, and I want to learn to make stuff in our house talk.
that would be helpful with your wife too.
Exactly. And I want him around
I'm over here.
Yeah, I want him around age 16 to start talking to a therapist about the trauma that I caused him. Like that's my goal.
Especially your choice of puppet.
It's always good to start
exactly.
early with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I can't give them childhood trauma unless I really get started going. Like if I get some practice while they're figuring things out.
Yeah.
How does it work, for lack of a better way to put it? Because
how you do the things you do.
Yeah, like you're not really moving your mouth, yet you're very articulate. A lot of articulation we find.
I think all of our moms can do it. Stop doing what you're doing.
So there is a mom skill to it, but there is so much of the articulation when you take speech classes, or when you're like as a pastor, when we're talking about or we're critiquing each other's sermons and presentations, we talk about diction, and it's so much of that comes from the tongue and the teeth and how you're moving your lips and those kind of things. You aren't really moving much of your mouth, or else it would give away the the gag.
Right,
so how does that work?
So my buddy, by the way, I would highly recommend that you get on your podcast here, a friend of mine, Jim Labriola. I can get you in touch with him.
That'd be great.
He's a hilarious guy. He and another guy named Tommy Morin, I think, would be hysterical to get both of them on here. They're both Italian, and you guys wouldn't get a word in edgewise.
Perfect.
But it would be hilarious to have them on.
Are they a part of CCA?
Well, sort of.
Okay.
Neither one of them. Well,
they
Jimmy
got rejected
has come,
too.
Stopped in to our retreats or conferences in the past, but he's never stayed the whole time.
Okay.
Tommy has actually never come, but we're all connected to each other in various ways.
Right.
Cool.
Anyway, Jimmy has a joke that he tells where he says, "Yeah, when I was a kid, I tried to be a ventriloquist, but I discovered that everybody in my family was a better ventriloquist than me, because they would watch me perform." And they'd look at each other and they'd say, "He's not very good, is he?"
Right.
Exactly.
That's the inherent mom trait.
Yeah. To answer your question, of course, there are only certain sounds, or there are certain sounds that we use our lips to form. And so those would be what are referred to as, linguists would call the bilabials. That's where you're using both of your lips, bringing them together.
Okay.
So the B sound, of course, is an example of that. B. And the unvoiced version of that is the P sound. P. Same with M and those would be, B, P, M. Those are the sounds that you have to form with your lips.
Right.
Then there's also sounds that you form with your teeth and your lips. Those are referred to as the fricatives. There's the unvoiced F sound, F, and the voiced V sound. And so you have to form those sounds inside your mouth, not using your lips. And so you do that with your tongue. So a B is actually a D. A P is actually a T. Again, those are similar to each other.
Right.
A T is an unvoiced D. That's how linguists talk about that sort of thing. The trick is that you're using your tongue in such a way that you are not doing like the D sound, D, that sounds like a D. But the B sound, if you're picturing this as my hard palate, right? The top, the roof of your mouth. And this is your tongue. When you say D, your tongue just kind of goes up and it just touches the roof of your mouth. D, D, D. But when I do the B sound using the ventriloquist technique, I'm actually flattening my tongue a little bit more on the roof of my mouth like this to block more air. So it's not quite as gentle a touch. D, D, like that. It's more B, B. I'm rolling it back a little bit. So for example, the boy bought a basketball, and by the way, it's easier, frankly, to do a character voice because you're pushing the sound through your nose. And so to do your own voice using this technique sounds a little wonky, but it's when you're using a character voice and you're pushing it through your nose, it just sounds more natural, quite frankly. So because it's distinct from your own voice. So I'll use a character voice through my nose. The boy bought a basketball.
The boy bought a basketball. The boy bought a basketball.
Who said that?
Well, there's a D, and then there's a B. D and B. D, B. B as in boy. There's an N, and then there's an M. N as in Nancy. M as in mother.
This is so weird.
This is incredible talent.
Like it is, but people that are watching are gonna think, oh well, they froze the video, and that is not what happened at all.
He's really happy.
Like I,
Yeah, so
I might as well throw the timestamp on there.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers, because that's kind of combining a lot of those.
Right.
Rubber baby buggy bumpers. Rubber baby buggy bumpers.
That's so wild. So how long do you have to practice that? Because
and what exercises do you do? For instance, when if you're practicing singing, you might. These are things that I've heard. Lay down on the ground because you're practicing engaging your diaphragm.
Right.
What kind of weird or awesome, depending on how you look at it.
I'm finding it more awesome these days. Yeah.
Well, actually, what you're talking about there is your voice, and that in your voice with your diaphragm. That's what gives you power. That's what gives you what they call support with your voice. And you do have to work on that, but that's an entirely different thing than what I'm describing here, which is more the mechanics of the sound, with your tongue. So it's both and. But I would pretty much warm up like any other vocalist would warm up. Any singer, this sort of thing, where you have to warm up your vocal cords. You got to get the support from down here. So
that's what. So how do you go from being so I'm fascinated with ventriloquism, and my grandmother's got me this puppet. I've got this album.
This close from
I know
being a ventriloquist.
I'm becoming better at this. I'm putting myself in the very large shoes of the comic giant known as Dave Pendleton.
Yep.
So my grandmother's given me this album. I'm figuring things out now.
You should get a Spurgeon.
Now, how do you
puppet and preach with it?
Like when other people are talking about like their early like 5, they're working on their type 3 or their type 5. They're like, you know what? I went to a club. I did some open mics. Is that what you did to get started? How did you get your start in comedy? Was it like a traditional route, or how did that happen?
That's a great question. The very first performance I ever did, I was 8 years old, and I had, I think, probably 5 or 6 minutes. I basically here was the brilliance of this record album. Jimmy Nelson included a little routine in the record album.
Yeah.
And so I memorized the routine. As a matter of fact, on side 2 of the record album, the reason he called it instant ventriloquism, he said, now this is cheating, but you can do this right away, instantly. You can memorize this script, and the puppet's voice, the character's voice, is on the record album. So you play that
play it over and over and over and over.
And you have to get the timing down, but then you're saying your part, and then you're cheating. It's the recorded voice. Here's what was brilliant about that, though. That taught indirectly the importance of timing and the importance of joke structure. He didn't teach any of that other than you picked it up by osmosis, because you kind of figured out routines. So I did learn the routine, had it down cold, and then of course I learned both parts.
Right.
And when I first got the record, I was 6 years old. So of course I did the whole cheating thing with the voice on the record, but then memorized both parts and started doing that routine. So that was my very first routine. My very first performance was using that routine. Then I actually worked with, believe it or not, my grandmother, who just took an interest in this, was so helpful. And we started coming up with dialogue that would be fitting for somebody that's 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. And the other thing that a ventriloquist can do, I have a very classic ventriloquist act as compared to, let's say, a Jeff Dunham, whose presentation is much more like stand-up.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by that is that you're probably not going to have Jeff Dunham break into a song,
right?
In his act.
Yeah.
But a classic ventriloquist will do some of these little, gee whiz kinds of little gimmicks to impress you with the skill of ventriloquism.
So Jeff's not very good, huh?
I mean, Jeff is actually quite a talented ventriloquist. He has amazing characters and amazing voices, and he has very, very good lip control. So
he's just not funny.
I say nothing critical about Jeff technically as a ventriloquist. But Jeff came up working the clubs. His goal was to be on the Tonight Show. He moved out to California, started working in all the clubs, up against all the other comics, so that he could eventually find his way onto the Tonight Show stage. And he accomplished that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And then made it onto Comedy Central, came up with Ahmed the Dead Terrorist, and the rest is history. Like he's in the stratosphere in terms of his notoriety and popularity. He's surpassed really any other ventriloquist in history in terms of what he's accomplished. So anyway, this is not about Jeff Dunham, but I'm just saying,
no, it's not.
Yeah, it's a community of people too. I've known Jeff since I was 13 years old. We attended the same ventriloquist convention. That was the other thing that helped.
That was really mean what you said about Jeff.
No, it's fine.
Now, what did you just say about Jeff? I didn't hear you.
He said something way earlier.
Yeah, I said something earlier that I didn't think it was funny, but that's just us throwing shade at Jeff Dunham.
And then you said you know him, and I said, "How dare you?"
Yep, that's essentially. There you go. Now we're all caught up.
Okay. All right.
This is why we're not allowed in the CCA. This is it right here.
I want to reiterate, you are definitely allowed to come to the CCA. I had nothing to do with the Facebook page.
We might have blown it a little bit out of proportion, just a little bit.
Such a hyperbole is the beginning of all good story.
Yeah.
So okay, you went to some of the same conventions and stuff together, and you got your start from performing when you were 8 years old. So where did you perform at 8 years old?
Oh, the Kiwanis Club, the Lions Club, the Rotary Club.
Okay.
Church groups, the mother-daughter banquet at church, the father-son banquet,
So are you developing a routine, or are you basically just using the B side of the album's routine at the beginning for all these different things?
It started with that, but then I had to expand that because I needed more than 6 minutes of material. I was being asked to come and do 15, 20 minutes.
Oh, man.
So what am I going to do with 15 or 20 minutes? So that's when I started coming up with songs, how about you sing a song, and routines about that, and developing the personality of the character more. And then also, frankly, just moving away from what would be the canned, scripted, for me kind of routine.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
As Arnold Schwarzenegger to bodybuilding, who is the best at ventriloquism? Who is the best lip control? I'm using your metric there, your word. Is there someone out there that just has, I can do 16 puppets at one time?
Yeah. I've been asked this question a lot, and even, who's your favorite, this sort of thing. When you think about ventriloquism, you're actually employing quite a few skills in the act. There is, of course, the skill of not moving your lips, and that's an important skill. but it's not the most important skill. Because if there's a ventriloquist who's really good at not moving his lips, but he's not funny, or if he's not a good puppeteer, then you're not going to consider him to be a very good ventriloquist. There are other ventriloquists who are amazing puppeteers who might not necessarily have the lip technique, but you don't care because these characters just seem alive. I'll give an example of that. This person wasn't even a ventriloquist. Waylon Flowers, and had a character, Madam.
Okay.
And Madam was in, if you ever saw him on television, most of the time when he was on television, they would just move the camera in on Madam and you just saw her.
Right.
But Waylon was in the background voicing Madam. He didn't even attempt to not move his lips. He just voiced Madam. But he had a whole act that was funny, it was entertaining, and it was successful. So that's an example of somebody who was really good at creating a character, had really good monologue. Actually, Madam did a lot of monologue, but he would dialogue with Madam as well. And he was a really good puppeteer. So Madam just seemed alive. One of my favorite ventriloquists, particularly as a puppeteer, is a guy by the name of Dan Horn. Dan is known among our peers as being the master puppet manipulator.
That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
That guy. The best of the best.
Dan Horn.
Yeah.
Dan Horn. So his characters, he uses the two rods to move the hands of the puppet.
Yeah.
And he's just he does that with one hand. He's got the puppet here, and then he's controlling the hands with these rods. And it's just brilliant. It's fluid. It's natural. You just feel like that this puppet is absolutely alive. You forget the fact that he's actually doing all the movements. As a matter of fact, one part in his act, the character gets mad at him and starts hitting him and then literally attacks him. And it's so believable that you believe that this puppet is totally beating him up.
That's
and
crazy.
Of course,
like
it's
Blazing Saddles, where he
himself
pulls the gun on himself.
Yeah, exactly. When he's holding himself hostage in Blazing Saddles. Yeah, no, he's going to do it. That's
somebody help this poor man.
So, as a ventriloquist, especially like during your act, is your goal to have the audience interact with the puppet, or is your goal to have them interact with the two of you?
Good question.
I want them to interact with the puppet, and I seldom go into the audience to talk to somebody in the audience. The question, if I do that, is not going to come from me. It's going to come from the puppet. And
the puppet's
my
fault.
goal is that they would interact with the puppet. And that's the fun of it, is that they just go right along with it.
Yeah.
I'll give you, there have been a couple of times when I was being interviewed, and it was a situation where it was a television type thing, and the person had the microphone and they're talking to the character. And so, they're saying, okay, I have a question for Aunt Tilly. That's one of the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll ask the question, hold the microphone up to Aunt Tilly.
Oh, yeah, that's not useful.
Which is not going to work.
Right.
So that to me is like, that's golden, because they're believing it. They've bought it.
Yeah.
They've bought that Aunt Tilly is the one that's speaking. I need to hold the mic to her. That's exactly what I want to have.
Somehow this person is alive.
Yeah. Okay, so my next question is about character development. We're fascinated and have been for years with voice actors. Danley and I both have had a huge appreciation for them, voice actors and impressionists, and there's a lot of different ways that people come up with characters, right? Because there are, the folks that, like Kevin Conroy, when he was cast as Batman, he had to figure out what Batman's voice sounded like. When
I always confuse Kevin Conroy with the guy that played Hercules. What's
Kevin
his name?
Sorbo?
Kevin Sorbo.
Different dudes.
I know. When
Also,
one
totally
of my friends,
different lifestyles.
I know. One of my friends called and said, Kevin Conroy died. I was at Hercules.
Yeah. So
I found out it was Batman, which is way worse.
There's those guys. There's guys like your Rob Paulsons that are given these characters that they get to bring to life, but they're told, hey, here are Pinky and the Brain. This is kind of how we see them, and those types of things. It seems like get to work with kind of a blank slate. So much in the same way that like some songwriters are like, you know, does the music come to you first? Do the lyrics come to you first? Do you come up with the characters and then find a puppet that fits your character? Or do you find the puppet and then you create the character based on like what you're seeing and the motif and stuff that the puppet's designed as?
I have found the puppet first.
Okay.
And then I decide what kind of a voice that puppet is going to have. Or even what kind of personality that puppet's going to have.
Because that was going to be my next question: is how do you develop the personality of these puppets? Because they're incredibly, almost they each seem like they have their own backstory that is very palpable whenever you're.
Are they based on any family members
to them?
My Aunt Tilly is actually based on my grandmother.
Okay,
you've heard already about my endearing relationship.
Who is very funny. The Aunt Tilly, I think, was probably the one at the show that we were at.
She killed.
She did kill. And, you know, she had some really wonderful crowd interactions with a young guy who, you know, she's what, like 94, I think?
94, yeah, good memory.
Yeah, so she's 94. She's looking and she's like, you know, I'm 94 and single, and talks to this kid in the front row. And he's like, I'm 15. And her response is, oh, I can wait. And it's like, you know, like, so everything about this character is believable. It's lifelike. And so some of it you said is based off of your grandmother. When you're creating the persona of the character, right? So the persona of Aunt Tilly, how does changing the personas work in your head, going from one character to another? They're vastly different. And then second, you know, how do you create sort of the character interactions based on their persona? Because each one of them is very specific in the way that they interacted with the audience when that did happen in the show.
Yeah, that's right. Well, it actually happened for me very organically.
Okay.
I wasn't sure how Aunt Tilly's personality was going to evolve. But I took her to a nursing home and walked around to the elderly women at this nursing home and struck up conversation with them. And little did they know that I was studying them and what they were saying and how they would move and how they would interact and the kinds of jokes that they would make. Some of it was just like, for example, I asked Aunt Tilly, how are you doing today? And she says, well, I can sit up and take nourishment. There is nothing original about that.
Right.
But it was just so delightful. And that is exactly what happened in the nursing home. Aunt Tilly walked up to this, you know, dear elderly woman, how are you today? And that was her response. So it's like, okay, that's a keeper.
Yeah, for sure.
So that was just research. Actually, some of the things that I heard were things that I couldn't even necessarily incorporate in my act.
I bet.
I'll tell you a funny story.
No doubt.
I bet.
I wasn't sure. Well, one of the women had asked Aunt Tilly if she was married. Now, I was not married at the time. I was still developing Aunt Tilly's backstory. And so what came out as, no, I'm not married. That's what Aunt Tilly said. This very ornery elderly woman looked at Aunt Tilly and she said, well, you know what? I've discovered in life that there's nothing in life quite so overrated as sex and quite so underrated as a good bowel movement.
Great line. Oh, man. Killer line.
I can't use that in my act.
Right.
I fell out of my chair.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
In the same conversation, it might have been, I think it was probably a different person, but, have you ever been married kind of question, or, they're asking about relationships. And she said, where am I going with this? That's what it was. How old do you have to be when you stop, or how old is someone when they stop? No, that's what she said. She said, do you know how old someone is when they stop enjoying sex? Another kind of, a little bit spicy question.
Right.
And of course, Aunt Tilly said, no, I don't. And then she said, do you know? And this woman said, oh, you're going to have to ask someone older than me.
Very endearing old lady.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I decided at that point, because I was getting such a kick out of these women who were being a little bit spicy, but not,
Yeah.
you know,
they weren't
over
like
the top.
blue,
And they
right,
weren't
yeah.
being cantankerous or mean or, you know,
They're still enjoying
even
life, and that's nice. It's
Yeah.
nice to hear.
yeah, there was just a sense in which they were just sweet, had a little,
And it's funny.
you know, a little edge to them that was just endearing, you know, like those
Right.
jokes that I just told you. So, so that's how I decided that's what I want Aunt Tilly to be.
Yeah, that's like
awesome.
every old lady in Texas. Like every time they interview somebody, they're like, "Oh, you turned 100 today. You know, what's your secret?" And she's like, "A Dr. Pepper and a cigarette every morning." And it's like those, you know, those kinds of things are the things that old ladies can get away with saying.
Anybody in town would have shot him for
for
$5.
Yeah, those kind of things
you stole my line.
are wonderful. You're welcome. Those kind of things are just incredible. Now you've got some upcoming shows and stuff that we were talking about before we hopped on the air. You want to tell our audience a little bit about that?
Let me put out a little plug here. I'm going to hold up this little flyer. Fisher's Comedy and Magic. Fisher's is my hometown, and I'm starting up a venue here. I've done one show. Robert G. Lee, who I know that you've had.
Yes, we have. Yep.
Was a headliner, or was one of the guys in the show, as was John Branyan, and a friend of mine, John Mobley, who's a magician.
Streblo.
So I want to have some sort of variety, because I'm a variety performer myself. But in this venue, I want to have some sort of variety performer, whether it's juggler or magician or whatever. I host it, and we also have live music. So it's cool. Great. It's a big show. It's just $25. My next one's coming up here March 10th and 11th, and it's Darren Streblo and the great Kaplan, David Kaplan, will do kind of the magic elements to it. He's got a great act. Look up David Kaplan on YouTube, or the great Kaplan. And then Kay Dodd, who also just she's a solid comic. So this is what I'm working on now. My next one's in March, and then the one after that, we're skipping April, and it's about every 6 weeks.
Okay,
man, that's such an awesome idea.
This.
Yeah.
So,
starting in place. Very cool.
Fisher's Comedy and Magic.com.
This is very David Graham.
Yeah.
Well, Dan, as you well know, we end all of our interviews with a segment that we call Controlled Rowdiness.
Oh, don't I know it.
Dave, these are just going to be a series of rapid-fire questions, which you can answer with as short or as lengthy an answer as you would like. Expect nothing from us by way of reply or response, and know that there are no right answers, but there are several wrong ones, so make sure not to step on any of those landmines. And to get us going, I'm going to throw it over to General Grease.
Yeah. David, what is the best Muppet? So Jim Henson Productions Muppets.
Gonzo.
Oh, yeah, frankly, I'm not sure what the wrong answer would be, but Gonzo's
acceptable.
Gonzo's the correct answer.
All right, what's the worst character you've ever created?
Tallulah. It was sort of like a monster creature, not monster. It was a creature, had big lips. I purchased. It was a stock puppet that I purchased from a puppet maker, and it looked comedic and funny to me. And I thought this would, go over, that I'd be able to, the material would just write itself.
Right.
And it did not at all. And I ended up getting rid of the puppet, and that was the end of that.
Okay.
Well, we have a new season of The Mandalorian that is out.
Yes.
Are you a Star Wars?
Am I a Star Wars?
Yeah.
Yes. Are you a Star Wars?
Yeah.
I can't keep it. I would never do good, because if I think something's funny, how do you stop from laughing when you think something's funny? If you say discipline, just
lip movement.
Probably true.
He's got the best lip discipline in the business.
No.
Yeah. So how do you prevent yourself from laughing, or like when you
that's
know
the
that you've
question?
got? Yeah. That was a legit question. Yeah.
I don't. I love to laugh, and I want to laugh.
Me too.
I just let it out. So, I'm a huge fan of laughter.
If the audience isn't responding, who bombed, you or the puppet?
It was definitely me. I'm going to take responsibility for that.
I like that. So you give the glory to the puppet, but you take responsibility.
For bombing.
That's
exactly
nice.
Right.
Yeah. That is not what I do in my marriage. I'll take some of those pointers back home and see whether or not we can apply those.
I've got one question it's a weird one.
Go for it.
If you're up for it. What's your favorite cult?
The Mormons.
Okay.
I find it just so crazy.
Yeah.
The common testimony of the Mormons is, I read the Book of Mormon and God told me that it's true. And basically, when I get into conversations with Mormons, this is true as far as I'm concerned. I also tell them that I've read the Book of Mormon. I've read it through 3 times now.
Did you read it with plates?
I read the Book of Mormon and God told me that it's not true.
Oh.
And I think I can say that with full sincerity.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing to their apologetics. To me, it just completely falls apart. It's interesting how they respond to me when I tell them that.
Oh, for sure.
They say to me, well, how do you know that it was God? And might it have been something else? Or maybe that was
Moroni?
just you, and not recognizing that that's the very thing that I could be asking them.
Right.
That's the point. So.
Yeah. It all falls apart whenever you're like,
well,
no, they told
I am
me this.
offended.
Are you?
Yes.
I had something insulting I was going to say, but I'm not.
You can say it
because I know you've been really trying to watch your weight. So
that's a jerk.
I told you I didn't want to say it.
Hey, you don't say that.
You said, okay, Dave.
Let's get to it.
Aliens have abducted you, and you've been given 60 seconds to tell them a story so great that they decide they are not going to destroy the Earth. You can't use the gospel. What story do you tell them?
Moroni came to America
in his temple garment.
That is a brilliant callback right there.
Yeah.
That was brilliant. As far as I'm concerned, you are now officially a part of the CCA.
Whoa!
I will just declare it today.
I will take this honor very seriously.
On the brilliance of that callback.
I will take it as seriously as the comedians do.
I have no idea what kind of a story I would tell to try to save the planet Earth if it's not going to be the gospel. Like, that's an insane. I mean, it's a crazy question.
Thank you.
I love it, but I'm not sure how to answer it.
What's a story that you want to tell us that's 60 seconds long that we'll find entertaining?
You got 10 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, the Earth is destroyed, but as far as this podcast goes.
Still up for the show.
Yeah. I mean, you know.
You know the story about how somebody was challenged to write a compelling story, but they had to do it with the fewest words.
Yes.
And the entry that won was, for sale, baby booties never worn.
Huh. Creepy.
It's a true story.
Wow.
6 words, and it tells.
It's a fascinating
enough
story.
Of a compelling story that it almost, brings you to tears.
Yeah, you want to know what happened? Was it just?
It's that it doesn't matter.
Weird.
It's just
it's
like
weird.
you can fill it in.
Okay, well let's end on this one.
Okay, let's do it.
Tonight's show hosts. Let's rank them. You go first with all 3.
Jimmy Fallon, hands down, is the best Tonight Show host. I really enjoyed Johnny Carson.
Yeah, I would say better than Carson, huh?
Well, Carson was a classic, no doubt about it. There were things about his personal life that just, in my mind, just in the back of my mind, give him some dings.
Yeah, they taint the show.
Have when I think of Jimmy Fallon.
Right.
I got you.
That makes sense.
Where does Jay Leno? I just want to know where Leno is. That's it.
That's it. You just want to.
Where does he fall in that?
Yeah.
I mean, Jay Leno is also brilliantly funny, but he
Number 4
kind of had his time, and I don't find him as engaging or I don't want to say ornery, even as I do Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah.
There's something about him that just makes him so endearing because of his sort of ornery personality.
So Fallon 1, Carson 2, Leno 3, Leno's Chin 4, Conan is number 5,
and then Letterman, and then adjacent.
Yeah, Letterman's over there. Dave, thanks so much for the time, man. Tell our audience where it is that they can find your stuff if they want to look at your social medias or check out your comedy.
Yeah. So for me personally, anythingcantalk.com. Anythingcantalk.com. And then, of course, my venue, fisherscomedyandmagic.com. And other than that, you can just Google David Pendleton ventriloquist, and you'll see videos and all kinds of things that'll just pop up during that time.
Magnificent.
Excellent.
Thanks for coming on the show, brother. We appreciate
Thanks
it.
for having me. This was a lot of fun, guys.
Dave freaking Pendleton.
Yeah.
All right, so
and me.
So here's what we didn't tell Dave, and I was gonna tell the story, but here's the thing. Dave and I have been cahooting for a while, and for those of you who are in our watching and listening audience, you're familiar with our friends over at the Tea Time Crimes podcast. Well, Megan's son, who is 5, decided he wanted a ventriloquist puppet. And so I was talking to Dave. We'd already planned on getting Dave on the show. So I was like, Dave, can you help me out here?
Give me
what do we need to do?
Tips?
And Dave was like, well, there's a couple of things. And, these are kind of some of the good puppets. And what Megan said is that her son wanted a ventriloquist puppet. He did not want really to have much discussion about it. But this is what he wanted. He's like, I'm not going to get a brother or sister. I want a ventriloquist puppet. And they were like, why? And he goes, I just want it to come to life and be my friend. Well, it turns out they'd watched some show where like a ventriloquist puppet comes to life and befriends the kid.
Not a scary way.
Not in a scary way. He plays pranks on the family. Shows are. Well, she hears him a couple of days later and he's like, I just want an evil ventriloquist puppet. And she was like, what? And he's like, no, he'll be nice. And then just runs off into the other room.
I like that kid.
Yeah, so I immediately contact Dave and I'm like, hey, look, this is what we're trying to figure out. Like,
we need an evil
we want a cost-effective way to do this. And Dave was like, all right, I'll come to the show. I'll give you some tips. So here's what we found. It is it's not evil per se. But this is something that all of y'all can look forward to, because by the time this airs, we will have already given this to Megan.
It's not working
to give to her son, and it has the string in the back, like he said. This just so happens
evil.
This is the puppet from the Goosebumps books. That's it. That's all I got. So he just has this string, like Dave mentioned, that's on the back. Also, his eyes glow in the dark. So we
you got that going for you, Megan.
We decided that we would get the hands don't really move, but I mean, if we want to, tuck it in here. But Dave did give us some tips. So Megan, now that you have this in your possession, this is how you work him. This is just with that, and it is just that little string on the back.
This has been an interesting dive for us into ventriloquism.
This is how our professional ventriloquist got his start.
Yeah.
Or interact with me, Dan. So this is on its way to Megan. I hope all y'all will be watching and listening whenever that episode comes out, because like I said,
is revealed.
This will air after she's already opened up the package. So this is maybe like the day after is when this. So that was part of our conversation with Dave, is like how to get this puppet to life, how to get it working.
Which now means that we need to book our time with them.
Yes, and we've got it. It's in. They are. Okay. We have this episode is literally slotted to air the day after she opens up that puppet.
Excellent.
Yeah. So if you're watching, make sure that you
Dave Pendleton.
Yeah. Make sure that you keep up with the show, because that's about to be opened to the terror,
the CCA
of Megan. We got Tea Time Crimes, the CCA, Dave Pendleton. Make sure that you check out our links in the show notes. Dave, talk to us a little bit off air. I know we joked a lot about the Christian Comedy Association. It's actually an organization that does a lot of great work. If you're interested in getting into comedy, especially clean comedy and Christian comedy, they're a great resource. They do a retreat every year that allows comics to not just come and have a place where they relax and kind of share about the struggles of being in stand-up, but also to work on material. And several of the comedians that we know have been a part of it. Kristen and Isaac Whitty, that's where they met, was there, and that's their...
Is there a Jewish comedy association?
Yeah, Los Angeles. Okay. So it's a pretty cool little organization that they've got. Links to that are in the show notes. Make sure you're checking out Dave's shows and his Dry Bar special, which we'll link in there. Thanks, Dave, for coming on the show. Thank you guys,
it was a lot of fun,
for listening.
Again, this is a fun dive into ventriloquism.
Y'all stay hard, keep jamming, and we'll see ya.
I'm David Pendleton, ventriloquist, and I think you should never listen to the Reverend and the Reprobate. If you do, you'll be joining about 12 people that commonly listen consistently.